She called him the devil, then found him barefoot, shirtless, and covered in flour at 3 a.m. Tessa thought Kellen Franco was nothing but a mafia boss in a tailored suit, a ruthless man using power to crush her family's restaurant. Then one night, wearing his shirt and searching for water in his silent mansion, she followed the smell of bread into a hidden room beneath the wine cellar. There he was, kneading dough beside a burning stone oven, with scars across his back and pain in his eyes that no empire could hide. Welcome back to the quiet hours, my friends. Tonight we begin in a cold corridor with a young woman named Tessa Cruz, just before she faces the man who could destroy everything she loves. She pushes open a heavy door and finds Kellen Franco barefoot before a roaring stone oven, firelight moving across the jagged scars on his back. Only days earlier, this same man had pinned her to a wall and offered her a brutal choice: cook for him for 30 days, or watch her family's restaurant be buried under fines, inspections, and legal threats. Her father is still in the hospital. The plastic band around her wrist is still tight. And now, with fear in her chest and anger in her throat, Tessa demands the truth. Slowly, the devil looks up. His eyes move over her in a slow, silent appraisal that makes her skin prickle beneath her leather jacket. Tessa refuses to step back. "We are not selling," she says, her voice thin but steady. Kellen rises from his desk with an unnerving calm. She expected a monster whose cruelty would be obvious. Instead, she finds a man 6'1", broad-shouldered and controlled, dressed in a dark suit with an open collar and a thin silver chain at his throat. His green eyes lock onto hers, sharp enough to cut. Every instinct tells her to leave that office, but the image of her father lying weak in a hospital bed keeps her feet planted. Kellen stops so close that she has to tilt her head to meet his gaze. With one quiet movement, Kellen presses a single finger against her chest, pushing her back until her shoulder blades hit the cold wall. The hospital band on her wrist scrapes against the plaster. He does not move away. His eyes drop to the plastic band, linger there, then rise to hers again. "Who do you think you are?" he murmurs, almost curious. "Nobody storms into my office like this." She straightens and gives him her name in a whisper. Tessa Cruz, daughter of the man who owns Rose Place. That little restaurant has fed this neighborhood for 20 years. She snaps, speaking of her father's sweat and her late mother's memory. When he tries to crowd her again, she knocks his hand away. Kellen only smiles. "I can take that place without touching you," he whispers near her ear. The warmth of his touch stays on her skin like a burn. "You should have watched your hands when you went after my father." She fires back, and his smile disappears. Kellen studies her for a long moment, then asks why she is not begging like the others. "If my father does not survive," she warns, "you will find out." Kellen calls for his guard. Bobby, without taking his eyes off her, targeted pressure on Rose Place. He says, "Fire codes, ventilation, waste disposal. Start with all 3. Tessa feels the room close around her. "My father gave 20 years to that place," she says, her voice shaking. "It is all we have." Kellen turns back to his desk. Sentiment does not stop a complaint from being filed. He lists their weaknesses with chilling precision. An outdated electrical panel, an insurance flag, a service alley that crosses land his company owns. "I did not create these problems," he says. Tessa laughs once, bitter and sharp. "No, you just learned how to aim them." Kellen's expression does not change. Finding weak points is not the same as inventing them. She steps closer, accusing him of putting a price tag on memories, labor, and people's lives. "Some things are not for sale," she insists. Kellen reminds her that men like him usually get what they want. Not this time. She shoots back. Only then does he realize she did not come to plead. She came to fight. For the first time since she entered. He looks genuinely interested. "If you want to protect something," Kellen tells her, "you need to prove it is worth protecting." Tessa says her father's 20 years should be proof enough. Kellen opens a folder and spreads the papers across his desk. City inspectors do not care about loyalty. Insurance carriers do not care about family recipes. Banks do not refinance memories. Tessa reads enough to feel the blood drain from her face. The danger is not vague anymore. It is printed, stamped, and ready to move. "What do you want?" she whispers. Kellen closes the folder with a sharp snap. 30 days. You cook for me. Breakfast and dinner at my estate. In return. The complaints disappear. The lawyers step back. And your father recovers without this hanging over him. She gives a bitter laugh and tells him to go to hell. Kellen calmly slides the contract toward her. 30 days of cooking. Or 30 days before Rose Place is buried. This is blackmail, she says, breathless with anger. He glances toward the window. Then back at her. Blackmail does not usually come with options. This is my attention. Tessa pulls her jacket straight like armor. I am not your maid, she says, then slams the door behind her. Outside alone on the sidewalk. Her knees nearly give out. She wipes at the tears before anyone can see them. But they keep coming. She has faced him and survived. The problem is, survival is not the same as victory. And Kellen Franco has just made her family's future depend on his mercy. Most people folded in front of Kellen Franco. But Tessa Cruz walked out in one piece. She only broke when she thought he could no longer see her. From above, Kellen watched her wipe her face, square her shoulders, and keep walking. The sight unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He had built an empire by finding pressure points. Yet Tessa refused to stay broken under his hand. He told Bobby not to use her sick father directly. Still, 3 days later, a $5,000 fine arrived at Rose's place. Tessa sat behind the register, staring at the white notice while her father lay in a cardiac ward across town. She did not cry this time. She started making a list of names, dates, and every agency that had suddenly remembered her family existed. 10 empty tables with red checkered napkins sat in the quiet dining room. The wooden counter hurt the most. The one her father, Ben Cruz, had sanded by hand. Now he was just another name in a hospital database. And Rose's place was a line item in someone else's development plan. Tessa pulled out her phone and searched the name, burning in her throat. Kellen Franco. There he was at a charity gala, dressed in a sharp black suit with a beautiful woman on his arm, looking polished enough to fool the entire city. She locked the screen and pushed the phone away. An arrogant man pretending to be generous, to keep herself from screaming. She scrubbed an already clean table, while Judy watched from the counter, knowing better than to interrupt. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply sits down at the best table and waits. Low voices drifted from the front. And when Tessa walked out carrying 3 menus, her heart stopped. At the table her father saved for anniversaries and birthdays sat Kellen Franco, flanked by 2 bodyguards, looking as if he owned the air in the room. Tessa's grip tightened until her knuckles went white. Mr. Franco, she said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. If you came to celebrate your $5,000 chimney fine, congratulations. I am still not backing down. Kellen looked up, calm as stone. He ignored the accusation, lowered his eyes to the menu, and quietly ordered the tomato soup and the most impressive thing the kitchen could make. Tessa met his gaze with a sharp, mocking smile. Then I suggest the humble pie, she said, served warm, especially for men who are too full of themselves. Kellen raised an eyebrow. The food was already beside the point. He was measuring her nerve. Order quickly, gentlemen, he told his men. I doubt patience is on the menu. Back in the kitchen, Tessa slapped the ticket down. Ray, her chef, stared at it. Humble pie. She tied her apron tight, eyes bright with determination. I am going to make him hate how much he loves it, she muttered, chopping a bell pepper with fierce precision. Through the viewing glass, Kellen looked around at the 10 small tables and realized this little place had outlived businesses with far more money behind them. Kellen leaned toward Bobby and murmured that he had expected a dump. This was worse. The place was warm, stubborn, alive, and that made it harder to crush without noticing the sound. In the kitchen, Tessa cooked with quiet fury. She shredded short ribs that had been braising all morning in tomato, garlic, and roasted peppers, then folded the rich meat into buttered pastry. Ray watched her with open admiration. "You are cooking like your life depends on it." "Tess," he said. She did not answer, because in a way, it did, when the pastry came out golden and crisp. She plated it with a smoky sauce, wiped the rim clean, and handed the dish to Judy. She would not give Kellen the satisfaction of carrying it out herself. From the kitchen window, Tessa watched Kellen stop speaking the moment the plate arrived. His eyes searched briefly for her before he picked up his knife. The blade cracked through the golden pastry, releasing steam scented with garlic, butter, and slow-cooked beef. Tender meat spilled onto the plate. Kellen took his first bite, and for a second the cold, powerful man at the table seemed to forget where he was. His movements slowed. His eyes lowered. He tasted it again, more carefully this time, as if the dish had found a door he had meant to keep locked. Ray leaned closer and whispered, while Tessa's smile sharpened. She had not saved Rose Place. Not yet, but she had forced Kellen Franco to feel something. Kellen refused to praise the dish outright, but he stopped Judy and asked for a wine pairing. Since that was Tessa's responsibility, she had no choice but to face him again. She straightened her apron and walked into the dining room with her chin high. "A Rioja Tempranillo," she said, "bold enough for the beef, bright enough for the pepper sauce, and not so expensive that it has to pretend to be interesting." One of the bodyguards coughed into his napkin. Kellen watched her, caught by her control. "We will go with your choice," he murmured, as she turned away. His voice softened just enough for her to hear. "Tell your chef the meal was impressive." She did not look back. He knew exactly who had made it. The small victory lasted less than a minute. In the dim light, Kellen offered Tessa a job for when she lost everything. She stopped with her back to him, every muscle tense. Kellen's smooth smile faded when she reminded him that her father had refused to be bought before and would refuse again. She slipped into the kitchen, leaving him with his wine and the silence he had earned. Inside, the staff tried to laugh about her brave little insult. Even Judy admitted that the man had charm. If you ignored the knife in his hand, Tessa knew better. Through the glass, she saw an enemy studying the room, like a man deciding where to place the first match. The illusion of victory vanished when Judy handed her the white envelope. The city of Cleveland was suspending their permit. They had 30 days before the doors would be locked. Tessa read the notice twice, then a third time, until the words blurred. The trap was built around the back exit that crossed Franco land. Kellen did not just want them ruined. He wanted them open long enough to feel the clock running out. Furious, she marched back into the dining room and slammed the bottle onto his table. "Did you enjoy the meal before or after you arranged this?" she demanded. Kellen, cold as winter stone, only asked if he could finish his wine first. He wanted her angry. Angry people made mistakes. Anger burned in Tessa's chest. But Kellen remained untouched by it, with one quiet word. He dismissed his men and told her to sit. Her fists clenched. Pride told her to stay standing. Survival told her to think of Ray, Judy, and her father. She sat. Kellen poured her a glass of wine and told her to drink. She took a sip without breaking eye contact, and a trace of amusement crossed his face. He admitted he had come for her answer, and to see whether she could really cook. Her silent glare told him everything. He had tasted her defiance on a plate. Now he wanted to see how far it would carry her when the lights of Rose M. Place were about to go out. He laid out his terms with cold precision. 1 month in his house, cooking his meals and keeping him satisfied as a chef. Tessa hated how elegant the cage sounded. She argued that her sick father and loyal staff needed her. But Kellen cut through every defense by offering to pay their wages during the arrangement. He even gave a brief, unsettling apology for her father before returning to the threat. This was her second chance, he warned, and there would not be a third. He studied the permit letter with theatrical indifference, praising her food while holding her livelihood hostage. To him it was strategy. To Tessa, it was her mother's name on the window and her father's hands on the counter. Kellen paid the $72 bill with a $100 note and left the change behind like an insult. He warned her that pride was an expensive luxury, then walked away, leaving her in the quiet wreckage of her family's dream. Tessa looked around at the 10 small tables her father had wiped clean for 20 years. Her resistance finally cracked. Her voice was barely a whisper when she admitted she did not have his address. Kellen smiled like a man who had expected this from the beginning and told her he would text it. Be there by 9. Later, after visiting her father at the hospital, she pulled up to his estate at 10 minutes to 9. The dark stone house looked less like a home than a fortress waiting to swallow her. Tessa stood on the stone path as a dark thought flickered through her mind. Maybe she could poison him and end this nightmare. She adjusted her jacket, but the door opened before she could knock. An older woman stood there with eyes like flint and a posture that demanded surrender. Tessa started to introduce herself, but the woman cut her off with one look. I know who you are. Come in inside. Black marble floors reflected the chandelier light like still water. The house smelled of nothing. No fresh bread. No garlic. None of the rosemary that always clung to Tessa clothes after a dinner rush. It was beautiful and lifeless. A rich manus monument to keeping the world at a distance. The stern housekeeper, Greta, made it clear that she ran this tomb of a home, then left Tessa alone in the enormous kitchen. Tessa's hands trembled as she tied on the apron, so she pressed them flat against the cold marble until the shaking stopped. She had to get through 30 days. Inside the spotless refrigerator, she found expensive ingredients arranged with military discipline and almost no soul. A slow, defiant smile crossed her face. All right, Kellen Franco, she whispered. Let us ruin your morning properly. She pulled out fresh basil from home and a loaf of bread she had baked at 4 that morning. Soon the cold kitchen began to smell alive. Down the hall, Kellen stood barefoot, watching without announcing himself. Kellen disappeared upstairs before she could catch him staring, as Tessa finished plating breakfast. A warm, lively voice broke through the heavy quiet. Oh my God. Greta, what did you make? It smells incredible. Tessa looked up and saw a young man in his early 20s, with dark curly hair and green eyes like Kellen's, though without the frost. It was Milo, Kellen's nephew. When he noticed Tessa, his grin slipped into confusion. She gave him a tight smile and explained that she was the temporary cook for the next 30 days. Milo's face lit up at once. I am a cook too, he declared, already reaching for the bread. In that cold mansion, his enthusiasm felt almost suspicious because it was so sincere. Milo watched her with genuine curiosity, joking that she might have poisoned the food. Before Kellen even entered the room, his deep voice cut through the air. Go ahead and eat it, Milo. Kellen walked past them toward the dining table in a sharp suit and crisp white shirt. Nothing like the barefoot shadow she had glimpsed earlier. Without looking at either of them, he remarked that Miss Cruz was no fan of his. If she had cooked with too much anger, he said the plate might actually be unsafe. Milo took an eager bite of bread and closed his eyes in bliss. I am not dying. Right, he asked. Tessa laughed before she could stop herself. Kellen heard it, and for 1 second, his expression changed. Kellen sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on Tessa. Miss Cruz, if Milo is still breathing, I will take my plate. She brought it over and set it down without a word, only for him to ask for his juice and coffee. Back in the kitchen, Tessa rolled her eyes. Then her attention caught on a heavy, warm loaf sitting at the end of the counter. When she picked it up, the scent of yeast, smoke and stone heat filled her senses. Where did you get this? she asked. This is real bread. Handmade oven bread. Greta and Milo exchanged a look that lasted half a second too long. A deadly secret, Milo teased. Tessa looked toward the hall, suddenly aware that this house had rooms she had not been meant to find. Milo sat beside his uncle and quietly asked whether Tessa had a boyfriend. Kellen answered with a freezing glare that made him retreat at once. From the kitchen, Tessa watched Kellen eat. He took a bite of the eggs and paused mid-motion as the flavors reached him. His next bite was slower. He tried to hide the reaction, but not quickly enough. Standing, Kellen buttoned his jacket and announced that dinner would be at 7:30. Then he added coldly, "Miss Cruz, I want you to serve the meal yourself." Once he left, Milo eagerly offered to show Tessa around the house, but she declined. She needed to get back to Rose Place, check the permit notice, and figure out exactly who had signed the complaint that started all this. When Tessa mentioned Rose Place, Milo insisted on driving her there. The ride was filled with his non-stop chatter about culinary school, risotto, and life in Cleveland. Tessa mostly watched the streets pass by, wondering how anyone could speak that much without taking a breath. When they arrived, Milo followed her inside, instantly charmed by the humble little eatery. Tessa tried to set a boundary, telling him they could not be friends. She pointed to his gold medallion and asked if it was some kind of Mafia boss symbol. Milo laughed warmly and opened the locket to show her a photograph of his mother. For the first time that morning, Tessa felt embarrassed. Not everyone close to Kellen was another weapon. Milo pulled out a chair and asked for coffee, his voice softer now. He told her that his father and Kellen had been brothers, bonded in a Naples orphanage before adoption tore them apart. Different homes, different countries, different wounds. At 22, Kellen crossed the world to find him. It should have been a clean, happy reunion, Milo said. But lost years do not simply disappear because two people share blood. Tessa listened while pretending to wipe the counter. She did not want to feel sorry for Kellen Franco. Feeling sorry for him made the ground under her anger less solid. When Milo headed for the kitchen, she opened the permit notice again and copied the inspector's name into her phone. Morning brought no comfort. Only a list of dietary dislikes that read like a map of Kellen's guarded life. Before Tessa could decide whether to ignore it, her phone vibrated. 2 words changed everything. Her father was awake. She dropped her apron and rushed to the hospital. In the sterile 4th-floor room, Ben Cruz sat frail and tired, his hospital gown hanging loosely from his shoulders. Still, his eyes found hers. When he asked if Franco was bothering her, she forced a smile and buried the truth. "The restaurant is fine," she said. "Everything is under control." The lie came too easily, and that scared her more than the notices. In the hallway, she called the city inspector and left a message with a voice steadier than she felt. She lied to her father because the truth might have hurt him more than the heart attack had. "Nothing is more important than you, Tessa," he whispered, and the words nearly broke her. She kissed his forehead, smelling hospital soap instead of garlic and olive oil. In the hallway, a nurse stopped her with news that made the walls tilt. Her father's medical bills, including the expensive treatments, had been paid by a mysterious benefactor. Tessa knew the answer before the nurse finished speaking. Kellen Franco did not give gifts without tying string around them. By afternoon, she was outside his fortress again, waiting for answers. A dark sedan glided to a stop beside her, and the tinted window rolled down. Kellen's cold, calculating eyes met hers through the open window. With one simple gesture, he told her to get in. Stepping into his vehicle felt like entering another world. Dark leather, chilled air, and his clean, suffocating scent. The world outside vanished behind tinted glass. Tessa demanded to know whether he had bought her father's survival. Kellen's answer held no warmth, but it carried a strange, unyielding code. He kept his word. Her father would recover in peace. She accused him of creating another debt, another chain around her neck. Kellen looked away and claimed he paid the bills only so her fear would not ruin his 30 days of culinary evaluation. Tessa did not believe that was the whole truth, which made it worse. His eyes returned to her, heavy and unreadable. He called her boring, as if her hard-fought life needed color. When she reached for the door, the lock clicked shut. Her breath caught in the quiet luxury of his presence. She noticed details she had no business noticing. The line of his jaw, the chain at his collar, the faint shadow under his eyes. Desperate. Her voice cracked as she asked what he really wanted from her. His gaze moved slowly over her face, lingering on her green eyes and the pulse jumping at her throat. Make me believe I lose more by taking Rosess than I gain by owning it, he said. Then he unlocked the door, leaving her on the pavement with a command disguised as a riddle. At 5:30 that evening, Tessa entered Kellen's kitchen with grocery bags cutting into her hands and a notebook tucked under her arm. Greta, the loyal gatekeeper of Kellen's life for 12 years, watched her with cold suspicion. To Greta, Kellen was nearly a son, and Tessa was a threat in an apron. Tessa insisted she was there only for a business deal, not to steal Greta's place or Kellen's heart. Greta's mouth tightened, but she warned her about Kellen's severe peanut allergy, with the seriousness of someone who had seen him almost die. Tessa wrote it down beside the inspector's name, the fine number, and the complaint date. If Kellen wanted proof, she would gather proof. If someone was hunting Rose Place, she would find out who. Tessa crushed a garlic clove, her expression softening into a brief, dark smile. She had no plan to kill Kellen, no matter how tempting the idea had sounded on the front path. She cooked with quiet defiance and refused to bow to his rigid list. Greta hovered, criticizing every move, warning that Kellen hated basil, messy pans, and being challenged at his own table. Tessa did not make food that apologized for having flavor. She tasted, adjusted, wrote down timing, and kept one eye on her notebook. The permits were not random. The fine had landed 3 days after she rejected him. The suspension followed his visit. Patterns mattered in kitchens and in war. Just as the tension tightened, Milo appeared at the door. Inside Kellen's mansion, a small spark of warmth flickered. Greta ordered them out, but Milo stayed to watch Tessa cook, amused by her fiery style. For one brief second, Greta's cold eyes softened before she left. Alone with Tessa, Milo started preparing dessert with easy confidence. She watched his hands move and recognized the rhythm of someone who had chosen his own path. Back in Anona, Milo had 3 choices: a dead-end desk job, working directly under Kellen, or doing what he loved. He chose pastry, and Kellen had not stopped him. That detail bothered Tessa. Men who crushed dreams usually did not protect other people's. She tucked the thought away, unwilling to forgive him for one decent fact. The kitchen felt almost normal, and the weight on Tessa's shoulders lifted. But peace was fragile in a house built around control. The laughter died the moment Kellen appeared in the doorway. His jaw tight, he asked with a mocking edge whether dinner now came with entertainment, draining every bit of ease from the room. He demanded his meal in 10 minutes and left behind the sharp sound of glass breaking somewhere down the hall. Tessa carried the dish into the silent dining room. Kellen sat there with his whiskey, posture frozen, eyes darker than before. She saw then that his anger was not only aimed at her. Something had happened before he came home, and he was punishing the room for it. Kellen did not look up from his plate. "I told Greta to give you the list," he murmured. Tessa's brow tightened. "She did, and you ignored it." Tessa crossed her arms. "I read it. Then I cooked." Kellen finally lifted his eyes. "I was not in the mood for surprises tonight." Anger rose in her throat, but she held it back. He cut into the chicken and took one bite. "Too much garlic," he declared. She defended the dish, explaining the acid. The herbs. The balance. When he repeated her own words from the diner back to her, a strange warmth moved through her chest. He had listened. Before she could leave, his hand closed around her wrist. She stopped at once, the heavy ceramic plate nearly slipping from her fingers. Tessa looked down at his grip and felt the heat of his skin. Beneath his thumb, her pulse jumped, betraying her before she could hide it. Kellen's voice dropped, low and rough. My mood had nothing to do with your food. I did not say you failed. When he released her, Milo sat frozen across the table, then muttered that he would pretend this was all about the chicken. Tessa escaped to the kitchen and leaned against the counter, legs unsteady. She had to remember the notebook, the fines, her father's hospital bed. A soft touch did not erase a threat. She had come here to protect her restaurant, not to care what haunted the man trying to take it. She kept repeating it because it was simpler than admitting anything else. Then his voice followed her down the hallway. No good night, Miss Cruz. Tessa froze, her hand hovering inches from the door handle. His slow footsteps clicked across the marble and stopped behind her. Kellen stood there, loosening his tie. The anger from dinner gone and replaced by something quieter, Tessa forced her voice to stay sharp. Good night, Mr. Franco. He ignored the dismissal, unbuttoning his collar as he gave his next order. 4 guests tomorrow. You prepare the menu. Milo is not doing dessert. He still has to learn. When she tried to pass, his hand closed around her arm. Tessa turned sharply, ready to fight. But Kellen did not look angry, and that made the moment harder to read. His fingers slipped away before she could pull back. I did not order you. Tessa, he murmured. I asked. She stepped into the night air, her old Honda Civic looking painfully out of place among luxury cars worth more than her restaurant made in a year. As she drove away, hands tight on the wheel, she tried to place him back in the category where he belonged. Enemy, then her thumb drifted to her wrist, touching the place where his hand had been. The call came before she reached the bridge. The $5,000 fine had been paid in full. Anonymous. Immediate. Impossible to ignore. The anonymous payment brought no comfort. It left Tessa with the sick feeling of being handled. Now she stood in Kellen Franco's immaculate kitchen, slamming groceries onto the marble counter harder than necessary. Her notebook lay open beside the cutting board. She had called the city twice. No one had called back. Milo wandered in sleepy-eyed, teasing her about what they were making. Before any warmth could settle, Kellen cut through the room like a shadow, dressed in a sharp suit and overcoat. He announced coldly that he would not be staying for breakfast, when Tessa challenged him, reminding him of the effort she had made. He answered with a frigid reminder of the line between them. I do not ask my employees for permission before deciding when I eat. Miss Cruz, we have a 1-month arrangement, Tessa said, lifting her chin to hide the sting. Milo watched from the corner, chewing a crust of bread, while Kellen kept his unreadable eyes on her. My chef, Miss Cruz, he said, feed the others. Then he disappeared through the door. When Milo gently asked about the terms of this strange arrangement, Tessa did not soften the truth. She explained how Kellen held the fate of her restaurant in his hands. Milo's playful smirk faded. If Kellen truly wanted you gone, he said quietly, Rosa's place would already be dust. You are blocking a multi-million-dollar mall project. Tess, it is not only him. Investors, architects, city people. Everyone makes money if you disappear. The bigger the build, the bigger their payday. Milo added, his voice low. Tessa stared at him, realizing the target on Rosa's place was larger than one angry billionaire. After he left, the kitchen silence felt oppressive. By late afternoon, she was back at the stove, the word employee still burning in her chest. She prepared lamb, bitter greens, and blood orange. determined to make Kellen remember what she could do. Greta watched quietly. When Tessa reached for a flimsy pan, Greta replaced it with a heavy, seasoned cast iron. "If you are going to prove something," she murmured, "do it properly." Tessa looked at her, surprised. Greta did not smile, but she did not take the pan back either. Milo led her down into the underground wine cellar, where the air was colder than anywhere else in the estate. Rows of dusty glass bottles rested beneath soft amber light. As Tessa studied the vintage labels, she asked a quiet question about the family that adopted Kellen. Milo's playful expression vanished. He looked down the long aisle of racks, his voice dropping. "The Francos gave him their name. Tessa, I am not sure they ever gave him a home." He warned her never to ask Kellen about his past unless she wanted the whole room to freeze. Tessa chose a bold red and headed back upstairs, carrying the bottle in one hand and an unwanted sympathy in the other. For one fleeting moment, the kitchen felt warm, almost familiar. Then the heavy front door opened. Milo vanished. Greta went to set the dining room, and Tessa was left alone with the resting lamb. That was when a low, melodic laugh drifted from Kellen's private study. Unable to resist, Tessa stepped quietly into the hallway. Through a narrow crack in the door, she saw him standing near his desk, sharp and closed off. Beside him was a striking woman with honey blonde hair and silk clothing, Ruth Bellamy. The name was on the project documents Tessa had found online. Lead architect, public face of the redevelopment. Ruth's manicured hand rose to touch Kellen's temple. "The longer hair suits you." "Franco," she murmured. "It makes you look almost human." Ruth whispered, tracing his chin. "Let us get through dinner. Close this miserable diner problem. And then the board will stop asking why you are hesitating." Tessa's fists clenched. Her home was not a problem. Milo appeared beside her and nearly made her jump. He teased her for spying, then confirmed Ruth was brilliant, ruthless, and very invested in the original design. "Every square foot matters to her," he said, "especially the ones your restaurant is taking away." Tessa tried to shrug it off, pretending she did not care. But Ruth's words stayed with her. If the pressure on Rose's place had a pattern, Ruth had motive. And Tessa was done being the only person in the room who did not investigate her enemies. Milo whispered that Kellen was not the enemy she thought he was. Tessa knew better than to trust that. Her family's livelihood was still on the line. When Kellen passed by, his eyes lingered on her a heartbeat too long. The pull between them was silent and heavy, but Ruth's sharp gaze sliced through it. "With polite poison," she commented on the new help. Kellen shut her down with a quiet command to drink, then led her toward the dining room, where the real wolves waited. Tessa followed, pouring wine for men who saw her father's life as wasted square footage. As dark wine filled Kellen's glass, his eyes dropped to her trembling fingers, then rose to her face. Ruth saw it too. Her smile sharpened. Ruth's cruelty was quiet and wrapped in silk. She lifted a spotless glass and claimed it was dirty, only to watch Tessa bend. Tessa took it, jaw aching as she swallowed her pride. At the table, wealthy men laughed. They called Rose's place one little restaurant, dismissing 30 years of Sunday sauce, her father's calloused hands, and her mother's name on the front window. To them, it was a stubborn structure delaying a profitable deal. Kenneth wanted the family paid off and the building cleared by Friday. Ruth added that public sympathy would fade once people saw the new renderings. Tessa stood 3 feet away, memorizing their words. If they wanted to erase her, they would have to do it while she was listening. Tessa's hands trembled beneath her apron, while these men decided her family's future over expensive Cabernet. Then Kellen spoke. He asked whether any of them had actually been to Rose's place. He described it perfectly. Small, warm, serving good food to people who were not pretending to need it. Some places take up space, he told them. Others give a block a reason to exist. Kenneth laughed and asked when Kellen became sentimental. Kellen's eyes moved past the investors and found Tessa. They should all try the humble pie before it is too late, he said. Those were her words. Returned to her in a room full of wolves. It hurt because it proved he had been listening when she thought he was only hunting. Kellen held her gaze, a tiny curve of his mouth acknowledging their shared secret. Then Ruth leaned back and sneered that nostalgia was not a business model. Tessa thought of her mother, kneading dough in a black funeral dress, because the restaurant still had to open the morning after the burial. She thought of her father teaching her to hold a chef's knife before she could reach the counter. When Ruth dismissed the diner again, Tessa's hand slipped, spilling a dark splash of sauce across the white linen. Ruth's voice cut like glass, demanding her attention. Tessa's blood boiled. Then a warm, heavy hand slipped beneath the table. Kellen gripped her trembling fist, his thumb pressing slowly against her racing pulse. Tessa's breath caught as Kellen's voice dropped like a hammer. Miss Cruz is not a servant, he told Ruth. She is my chef. Watch your tone. The table fell into suffocating silence. Ruth's smile froze, but her eyes promised retaliation. When Kellen let go of Tessa's hand, the absence of his grip felt louder than the touch itself. Greta quietly cleaned the stain, giving Tessa room to escape back to the kitchen. There Tessa pressed her hands flat against the cool marble, trying to steady herself. Milo stepped in and told her not to mind them because they did not know who she really was. Tessa looked toward the hall. Maybe not. But Ruth knew exactly what she was doing, and that made her dangerous. Tessa whispered the bitter truth. Kellen wanted her to hear how easily they could erase her life. Milo's silence answered her. Through the kitchen glass, Kellen's eyes found hers again, holding her in a gaze that felt too much like protection and too much like a trap. Unable to watch her suffer, Greta took the tray and told her to go home. Tessa untied her apron, shed the uniform, and walked down the quiet hallway. Halfway to the door, his voice stopped her. Tessa, the low sound moved through her before she could stop it. She stopped in the shadows and refused to turn around as Kellen stood behind her. Close enough that she could feel the weight of everything neither of them had said. The dim light caught the sharp line of his jaw as he stepped closer. The food was better than that table deserved, Kellen said. Tessa looked up and saw the golden flecks in his green eyes. That almost sounded like a compliment, she replied. It is a fact, he said simply, then told her to stay the night. Tessa refused, choosing the cold night over his roof. Before she left, though, she asked the question burning in her chest. Why did you let me hear them talk about my father like that? Kellen looked down at her. I am not hiding the room from you. Her grip tightened on the door handle. Honesty from him could still feel like another form of control. They are business partners. Tessa, not my friends, Kellen said coldly. Her knuckles turned white around the handle. You put my entire life on that table tonight, she whispered. He did not deny it. He told her she now knew where things stood. To them, her family was a small wrinkle in a billion-dollar deal. She wanted to hate him for letting those men carve up her future over the dinner she had cooked. Yet his steady gaze turned her anger into something more complicated, and that frightened her most. Good night, Mr. Franco, she said, stepping out to her old Honda Civic. She turned the key, but the engine coughed and died. She tried again. The motor choked, then fell silent. Kellen watched from the dark driveway. Bobby noted that the old car had a dying battery and a leaking radiator. She would not have made it past the bridge. Seeing Tessa rest her forehead against the steering wheel, Kellen told Bobby to have Greta prepare a room and fix the car before morning. Tessa stood in the cold with her pride scattered on the gravel. With no choice left, she walked back toward the mansion. As she reached the door, it opened. Kenneth Jason. And Ruth stepped out. Ruth smirked and noted that the cook was leaving too. While Kenneth offered a warm compliment, Kellen leaned against the frame. Silent eyes moved right from his face to Tessa, and something cold passed between them. Tessa dipped her chin, a soft thank you slipping into the night air. Milo stepped forward, hands deep in his pockets, proudly telling them that Tessa was a true artist who ran her own place. When Kenneth joked about stealing her away for his wife's dinner parties, the atmosphere turned ice cold. Kellen did not move. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble as he said she was not available. Tessa stiffened at the possessive edge in his words, but Kenneth backed off at once. Ruth studied her with a sharp, calculating gaze before offering her a ride. Tessa held her ground and chose to stay. The silent shift in Kellen's expression said he knew he had won something, though he had no right to claim it. Milo guided Tessa inside before the tension on the porch could break open. Left alone with Kellen, Ruth tried to pull him back into her world, offering him a way out of a boring night and a complicated distraction. But his eyes stayed fixed on the door where Tessa had disappeared. His refusal was cold and final. Ruth left with a bitter, knowing smile, her heels clicking against the gravel. Inside, Greta handed Tessa a soft, oversized gray t-shirt belonging to Kellen. It was only fabric, but it felt too intimate in her hands. When Milo teased her from the doorway, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted, angry, and far too aware that the shirt smelled faintly like him. Tessa wanted only to disappear into sleep, but Milo could not resist teasing her, pointing out that Kellen's room was right across the hall if she got scared. Greta offered her the cottage out back as a safer place to stay, but the playful warnings about old house noises only made Tessa sigh. She did not need ghost stories. The real storm in her life slept under the same roof, alone beneath the cold golden glow of the guest room lamp. She tried to make sense of the absurdity of her situation. Then a knock broke the silence. When she opened the door, expecting Milo, she found Kellen standing there, sleeves rolled up, quiet intensity filling the frame. Kellen stood in shadow, the hallway light outlining his figure as the laughter died on Tessa's lips. His low voice asked if she was comfortable, and the question struck deeper than it should have. She tried to look away, but her eyes betrayed her, drawn to his open collar and steady gaze. She reminded herself of the fines, the threats, the men laughing over Rose's place. He wished her a soft good night. She whispered it back, closed the door, and pressed her spine against the wood. There was no attraction, she told herself. No softness, no danger beyond the obvious kind. But his scent lingered on the shirt in her hands, and the lie did not survive the quiet. Tessa stared at Kellen's shirt, breathing in clean laundry, and something warmer beneath it before slipping it on and stepping into the shower. Later she woke to an unfamiliar dark ceiling. It was 2:45 in the morning. The house was too silent, and every fear she had pushed aside in daylight returned with sharper teeth. As she lay there, a deep, steady sound echoed from beneath the floorboards. She tried to dismiss it as the old house settling, but the noise continued, rhythmic and heavy, parched and restless. She turned on the lamp, found a small bottle in the minibar, and drank it in one long, careless gulp, desperate to soothe her dry throat and break the silence. The burn hit her at once. Tessa gasped, coughing into her hand, then held the small bottle up to the dim dresser light. Vodka, of course. Desperate for real water, she slipped from the room, barefoot and wearing only Kellen's oversized shirt. The marble bit cold against her toes with every step through the silent house. In the kitchen, one amber light glowed over the counter. She found a bottle in the fridge and drank deeply. Then the sound came again from below, a steady, heavy thud, followed by the faint scent of wood smoke. She remembered Milo's warning and Greta's strange little smile. It was 3 in the morning, and every sensible part of her knew she should go back upstairs. Tessa did not go back upstairs. Curiosity, fear, and something she refused to name carried her to the cellar door. The air rising from below was different. Thick, warm, and alive. She paused with one hand gripping the cold banister. A rich, earthy scent drifted upward, followed by the heavy slap of wood against wood. Stepping onto the stone floor, she followed the sound past rows of expensive wine bottles and down a shadowed corridor where amber firelight danced along the walls. She should have turned around. Instead, she reached a heavy iron door and pushed it open. The scent of fresh bread washed over her, and the room beyond felt like a secret kept too long. Inside, a brick oven glowed orange, throwing firelight across Kellen Franco. He was shirtless and barefoot, dark hair damp, flour dusting his chest and shoulders. He worked the dough with slow, steady intensity, muscles tightening beneath bronze skin. Tessa could not breathe. 2 hours earlier, she had lied to herself in the mirror and claimed he was not attractive. Now, watching the most dangerous man in Cleveland knead bread in the middle of the night, every defense she had built began to loosen. Kellen's hands stilled, and he looked up. His gaze swept down her bare legs, took in the oversized shirt, then locked onto her eyes. Neither of them spoke. The silence did not need help. The midnight hour had a weight that made every small movement feel dangerous. Kellen did not look surprised to see her. His gaze rested on Tessa with a heavy, motionless intensity that made her skin heat. She swallowed hard and asked, in a fragile whisper, what he was doing down there in the dark. He looked at the raw dough beneath his hands, then back at her. Baking, he said, as if that explained the fire, the secrecy, and the look in his eyes. Tessa glanced at the brick oven, the flour, the wine glass on the table. The vodka in her blood made her brave enough to step farther inside and demand a real answer. Kellen took a slow drink of wine, watching her over the rim. Her heart told her to leave, but his presence pulled at her. Kellen stood only a few feet away, studying the flush rising on her skin. His gaze dropped for one brief, agonizing second to the hem of the shirt before returning to her eyes. Tessa tugged at the collar, her pulse beating wildly. She whispered that she should go, but her feet refused to move. Instead, she asked if he really baked the bread they ate upstairs. For one fleeting second, his cold mask cracked. Something raw and tired showed through. Then he looked away, as if she had touched a wound without permission. The fire behind him roared softly, filling the room with heat that made every breath feel too close. At 3 a.m, the rest of the world slept. But down there, 2 people stood on the edge of a truth neither of them wanted. Tessa took a slow step closer, eyes fixed on his flour-dusted hands and the glowing oven behind him. Why? She asked. Kellen lowered his head, pressing both hands flat against the wood. His voice was rough when he asked if she truly wanted to know. Then he turned the question on her. Why are you down here? Tessa, why are you not asleep? She searched for words and claimed she heard a noise. It was not a lie, just not enough of the truth. He walked toward her, barefoot steps closing the distance until there was almost no air left. Tessa rubbed the back of her neck, skin burning as she gave a weak excuse about the heat in the room. As her arm moved, the collar slipped sideways, exposing the bare curve of her shoulder. Kellen's eyes locked there. A silent struggle crossed his face before he forced himself to look away. She pulled the fabric back into place, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear it. She muttered that she should leave, but again her body refused to obey. Turning back, she asked if he truly baked the bread. Something in him shifted. He reached out, his warm flour-dusted fingers closing around hers. He led her toward the blazing oven, and she followed, caught by the firelight on his bare shoulders. Tessa was supposed to admire the oven, but her eyes stayed on his face. Kellen ran one finger along the brickwork and spoke of importing the stone from Monona. When his hand fell, his gaze dropped to the flames. A real smile touched his mouth, fragile and unguarded, nothing like the polished mask he wore upstairs. He asked what made a house a home, if not the scent of baking bread. The question landed softly and hurt more than it should have. He turned back to the dough and kneaded with a heavy rhythm shaped by old ghosts. He confessed that he lost his home at 6, when his parents died. He could no longer remember their faces, but he remembered the smell of bread. The past spoke through him in short, controlled pieces, as if too many words might break something open. Kellen folded the dough, his hand slowing as he admitted that peace had never lasted long in his life. With a sharp crack, he slammed the mixture onto the stone as he leaned toward the roaring oven. The light shifted, revealing deep silver scars across his lower back. Tessa stepped forward before she could stop herself. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the history carved into his skin. The moment her fingertip brushed the raised white lines, his whole body locked. Without turning around, his voice came low and wounded. "Those were a gift from the family that raised me." His eyes darkened in the shadows when he turned back to her. The air between them felt thick with heat. Flower and things neither of them knew how to say. His hand rose to cradle the back of her neck, gentle enough to be a question, firm enough to make her breath catch. Tessa could still run. She knew it. He knew it. She stayed. Her fingers rested against his skin. And then their lips met. The cold, logical world vanished. For a moment there was only the fire, the scent of bread, and the shock of wanting the man she had sworn to hate. He lifted her onto the flour-dusted wooden table, but his hands remained careful, waiting for her to choose him back. Desire pulled her under like a dangerous tide, but reality returned in a flash. Tessa caught sight of herself in the tarnished mirror on the wall and saw the truth too clearly. Kellen's shirt on her body, his hands at her waist, her own face open with need. Panic closed around her throat. She sat up suddenly and whispered for him to stop. Kellen pulled back at once, releasing her without hesitation. No anger, no pressure, only a rough breath and a quiet command for her not to apologize. His thumb brushed her cheek once, so gently that it nearly undid her. Tessa slipped off the table on trembling legs. She had not lost control completely, but she had come close enough to know the danger was real. She ran before her heart could betray her further. The stone stairs chilled her bare feet as she fled, hands shaking when she reached the kitchen counter. Down in the basement, Kellen stood frozen, head bowed, listening to the crackle of the oven. Morning came, but daylight brought no relief. In the shower, hot water washed the flour from Tessa's skin, but it could not wash away the memory of his mouth or the pain in his voice when he spoke of the scars. She looked at her reflections and whispered that it would never happen again. Her own eyes did not believe her. When she entered the kitchen, 2 warm golden loaves of bread waited beside the coffee like an answer he had left without signing. Tessa traced the warm crust, her mind flashing back to his hands, the scars, and the heat of the basement. She pulled away just as Milo walked in, wet-haired and smiling, eager to share what he believed was a huge secret. He whispered that Kellen was the master baker behind the bread, completely unaware of the irony. Tessa forced a nod and murmured that it was unbelievable, while her heart pounded with the truth. Greta soon joined them, her sharp eyes studying Tessa a little too closely. She announced that Kellen had left early on business but left a message. Tessa's cooking duties were to continue. Tessa asked where he went. Greta only said that when Kellen ran, he preferred to call it work. Tessa smiled and nodded, but her thoughts were already elsewhere. She checked her phone and saw no missed calls from the city inspector. No answers from anyone who had signed the notices. When Milo casually mentioned that Kellen's men had fixed her car before sunrise, she went still. Outside, her old Honda ran beautifully. A new battery, a patched radiator. Even the cracked belt had been replaced. Sitting behind the wheel, she gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles hurt. He was supposed to be her enemy, not the man who fixed what she could not afford to fix. Then she opened her notebook again. Kindness did not erase evidence. She still needed to know who was trying to close Rose Place. Everything seemed to be holding together, but a heavy secret pressed against Tessa's ribs. She smiled through her hospital visit, then returned to the diner and faced Ray and Judy's questions with half-truths. She did not know danger was watching from across the street. Ruth Bellamy sat in her car, eyes fixed on Tessa through the window. On the seat beside her lay a folder of revised schedules, permit notes, and a copy of the original demolition plan, with a poisonous smile. Ruth made a call and requested a targeted inspection under the cover of a food poisoning complaint. She did not sound jealous. She sounded professional. To Ruth, ruining Rose's place was not revenge. It was project management. 3 days crawled by at the Franco estate in a heavy, painful quiet. Tessa cooked, cleaned, and tried not to listen for Kellen's footsteps. At night, the memory of his scars and dark eyes kept her awake. During the day, she worked her own investigation. She called the health department, checked complaint numbers, and asked customers whether anyone had been sick. No one had. Then Judy found something useful in a local charity report. Donna Whitfield. The name attached to a small redevelopment donation. Shared a mailing address with a contractor listed under Ruth Bellamy's original design package. Tessa copied the page into her notebook. On the 4th morning, Ray called in panic and told her to come immediately. The devastating words came through the receiver. The diner was being shut down over an alleged food poisoning complaint. Tessa felt the world tilt beneath her. Ray explained that people were already taking pictures of the closure notice on the door. She pulled off her apron and grabbed her keys. When Milo asked what happened, anger flared through her, and she told him to ask his missing uncle before storming out. Deep down, she knew the timing felt wrong. Kellen was cruel, but he did not usually hide behind anonymous complaints. Fear moved faster than reason when everything she loved was slipping away. By the time she reached Rose's place, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, whispering like the restaurant was already dead. Tessa held Judy close, then asked Ray who filed the complaint. Ray only shook his head. The inspector would not say. A false food poisoning claim could ruin their reputation forever, even if it was cleared later. Her father was coming home next week. Seeing his life's work destroyed would break him. Ray gently suggested selling before the place lost all value. Powerful people always get what they want. Tessa looked at the red notice on the glass, then at the regulars standing across the street with worried faces. This restaurant was her mother's dream, her father's survival, and her own name whether she wanted to admit it or not. She wiped her tears, took photos of the notice, and called every loyal customer she knew. By evening, Tessa stood in the biting wind, phone in hand. She had saved Kellen's name under one bitter word. Devil. Her fingers moved before her mind could stop them, typing a furious text that accused him of breaking their deal and destroying her family restaurant. Then she added a second photo. Donna Whitfield's donation record beside Ruth's contractor address. Explain this too, she wrote, and hit send. Seconds later, the screen lit up with his command. Office now. Meanwhile, Kellen stood at his high-rise window, believing distance had restored his control. Then her message arrived, and the first thing he felt was not anger. It was fear, followed by recognition. He tried to treat her as a business problem, but Tessa would not stay inside a file. When the office door opened, the air shifted. She stood there with raw eyes, wind-tangled hair, and a clenched jaw. She accused him of winning and whispered that the complaint would destroy her family's legacy. Then she threw the printed record onto his desk. If this is not you, then why does Ruth Contractor have the same address as the woman accusing us? Kellen stepped closer, raising his hand until his thumb hovered near her cheek, but did not touch. If I wanted to win, I would have destroyed that place the day we met, he murmured. Her voice cracked because she knew he was telling the truth. Now they both knew where to look. Kellen's voice dropped near the back of her neck, rough with the restraint he had spent days pretending not to need. He admitted he had stayed away because the basement had made him careless. Tessa turned on him, tear-stained eyes flashing, and accused him of ruining her life, whether he signed the complaint or not. The spell broke when Bobby walked in with a file and the same name she had found. Donna Whitfield. Kellen's expression changed at once. Donna was a shell donor tied to Ruth contractor and 2 inspection requests. Kellen put on his jacket, every trace of softness vanishing. Tessa watched the transformation and realized she had not walked in helpless. She had brought the first thread. Kellen adjusted his collar, his voice cold, as he told her that her duties would continue and that he would be home by 7. Then he ordered Bobby to find Ruth and every person she had called in the last month. Alone in his office for one breath too long. Tessa clenched her fists and reminded herself not to mistake action for absolution. Later, back in the kitchen, the heavy smell of chopped onions could not hide her distress. Greta quietly set a warm cup of tea beside her, reading the pain on her face. When Tessa finally broke and admitted she was lost, Greta touched her shoulder with a gentleness that nearly undid her. Kellen breaks things before they can leave him. Greta whispered. That does not excuse him, but it explains the mess. Milo burst into the kitchen, eyes bright with the innocent excitement of a young man who had finally landed a date. Greta teased him warmly as she left, and Milo obsessed over his reflection in the glass cabinet. He wondered aloud if he should grow his hair long like Kellen to look more rugged and charismatic. The mention of Kellen sent an ugly sting through Tessa's chest. She sliced into a lemon, her laugh turning bitter. Long hair on a man is ridiculous, she snapped. A cheap trick to look untamable. Milo laughed, missing the jealousy behind the words. Tessa slammed the knife down harder than necessary. She hated that she could still remember exactly how Kellen's hair had felt between her fingers. Milo was still laughing when the room went silent. Kellen stood in the doorway, his dark eyes taking in the knife, the lemon, and the easy closeness between them. Tessa froze and retreated at once behind her professional mask, addressing him formally as Mr. Franco. Kellen did not believe it for a second. His gaze held hers, heavy and knowing, before he quietly ordered her to his study. Outside that door, her heart hammered against her ribs when she stepped inside. He was pouring a drink, sleeves rolled up, strength exposed in the lines of his forearms. Ruth's name appeared across the open file on his desk. Tessa placed her own copy beside it without waiting to be asked. He approached slowly and asked when she would stop using his formal name. Tessa lifted her chin and let his first name slip from her lips like a challenge. Kellen. The reaction was immediate. His gaze fell to her mouth, burning with a hunger he could not fully hide. But she demanded answers. Was he helping her, or cleaning up a problem she had already uncovered? He backed her against the locked door, his body close, swearing he had never played with her. When she asked why he cared, he leaned down, his mouth brushing hers with aching softness. He confessed that he had spent days trying to stay away. And then the distance between them broke under the weight of everything they had denied. Heat rushed through her, but Tessa forced herself to push him away. She was tired of being pulled between threat and tenderness, tired of feeling like the mouse in his elegant trap. She demanded to know what he truly wanted, and reminded him that her only goal was to save her family's restaurant. When she turned to leave, his soft voice stopped her. She looked back and saw him standing there, open and vulnerable in a way she had never expected. For a moment, she saw through the polished cruelty to the wounded boy still searching for a home. But responsibility weighed more than desire. She had her father, her friends, and her mother's memory to protect. What happens to Rose Place when your guilt fades? She asked. Tears stained her face, but she kept her chin high and told him to either help her or let her go. He insisted she was more than a passing desire, but she could not afford to believe him. She decided to walk away from him and the house for good. When she opened the door, he asked why she was giving up. The truth stayed trapped in her throat. She was leaving because her love for him was becoming stronger than her anger, and she could no longer use hatred as a shield. In the dark hallway, Milo and Greta tried to stop her, but with shaking hands, she grabbed her bag and ran. Behind her, Kellen did not follow. For once, the man who took everything let the one thing he wanted leave. Tessa murmured that she had to go, her body stiffening as Greta reached out. Then the dam broke. She let Greta hold her, breathing in coffee and warm bread while her heart split open. Greta whispered that feelings were not weakness, but Tessa could barely hear through the rush of blood in her ears. She ran to her car and drove away. Upstairs in the study, Kellen watched her taillights disappear. His forehead rested against the cold window pane, his hand flat against the glass, wanting her to stay and knowing he had no right to ask. Then he straightened and called Bobby. "Pull every invoice Ruth signed," he said. "Start with the address Tessa found. If Ruth poisoned that complaint, we expose it in daylight." Kellen stood by the window, staring at the empty driveway. Across town, Rose's place sat dark, chairs stacked and the red closure notice still clinging to the glass. Tessa sat at her father's table, fingers wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Ray leaned in and gently suggested that it might be time to move to a better neighborhood. "The world is changing, Tess. Maybe we should change too." Judy took her hand and reminded her that family was not defined by an address. Tessa looked at the old counter, the faded photographs, the corner where her mother used to knead dough before dawn. She understood them, but leaving felt too much like letting her mother disappear a second time. Tessa bolted through the door when she saw two city workers outside. They peeled the red notice from the glass, leaving the window clean. When she asked why, they only muttered that the complaint had been withdrawn. Later, the inspector finally called back and admitted the claim had collapsed when no medical record could support it. Kellen had made it happen, but the first clue had come from her own hands. A week passed with no word from him. Tessa spent her mornings searching public records and her nights rebuilding trust with customers. On Tuesday, her father came home, thin and fragile, but smiling as he stepped into the sweet aroma of his kitchen. Tessa held her father tightly and tried to hide how much had changed. She planned to tell him only when she had a real answer. That evening, Ben found her folder of maps, lease records, inspection timelines, Ruth contractor records, and project renderings spread across the office desk. He did not scold her. He only touched Rose's photograph and said, "Your mother never wanted this place to become a chain around your neck." The words stayed with Tessa long after he went to rest. Then Kellen's assistant called, summoning her to a meeting at 10 the next morning. At nearly 10 o'clock, wearing borrowed black heels and carrying her evidence, Tessa walked into the boardroom ready to fight for Rose's place and for herself. Kenneth Adams noticed her first, a patronizing grin spreading across his face. He mockingly praised her father's cooking as humble pie. Tessa kept her composure and said she was there on her father's behalf. She placed her folder on the table without opening it. At the far end, Ruth Bellamy sat perfectly still, her honey blonde hair smooth, her smile polished, her eyes sharp with warning. Then the heavy oak door swung open, and the room seemed to lose air. Kellen Franco walked in. He looked different. The long dark hair she had once touched in the basement was gone, cut close, severe, clean. It felt like seeing a door slammed shut. He looked at Tessa quickly, precisely, with no warmth anyone else could read. "Miss Cruz." "Welcome," Kellen said, and the words chilled the room. He was the cold developer again, declaring that enough time had been lost and the deal would close today. Tessa hid her trembling hands beneath the table, fighting the urge to break down. She wanted to hate him, but she could still remember warm bread, old scars, and the way he had let her go. Kellen slid a folder forward and introduced David Thorne, the new architect. Ruth's smile vanished. David rose to present the revised blueprints, and Kenneth frowned before the first page was fully turned. Something had changed. Tessa sat straighter, her own folder still under her palm, ready to speak if this was another trap. Tessa leaned forward and studied the blueprint. Among the new buildings, there it was, Rose Place, sitting in the center like a stubborn heartbeat. David explained that the entire plan had been redesigned around her family's restaurant, leaving its structure and character untouched. Tessa gripped the table in disbelief and asked Kellen why he was not buying them out. Kellen stood, his voice low and steady. The old plan gave us more square footage, he said. This one gives us a center. Kenneth snapped that sentiment was not a revenue stream. Kellen did not look at him. Rose Place stays exactly where it is, he said, untouched. Fully deed protected, with renovation costs covered by my company. The boardroom erupted. Kellen S. associates complained about lost retail space, altered traffic flow, and investors who would hate the delay. Ruth stood and declared that the revised plan was reckless, sentimental, and financially irresponsible. Before Kellen could answer, Tessa opened her folder. Reckless is using a fake victim to close a family business, she said. The room went silent. She laid out the charity record, the shared mailing address, and the contractor link she had found. Bobby then stepped forward with phone logs, invoices and emails that completed the chain. Donna Whitfield's name appeared again and again, tied to Ruth S. consultant. Ruth's face drained of color. Kellen looked at Tessa first, then at Ruth. You are finished here. Ruth reached for control, but there was none left to take. Kellen informed the room that every contract connected to her firm was terminated, and the documents had already been sent to the City Ethics Office and the Licensing Board. Kenneth started to protest, but Kellen opened a second folder. 30,000 square feet are no longer commercial retail, he said. That space becomes a residential transition center for foster kids aging out of the system. The land is mine. Kenneth, the decision is mine. Kenneth threatened to pull 2 investors. Another man warned that the banks would demand a revised valuation. Kellen slid the financing papers across the table. I replaced the money this morning. Anyone who wants out can leave before lunch. Ruth was escorted out first, her heels striking the floor like little cracks in glass. No one followed her. Silence settled over the boardroom, and Tessa felt her heart break for Kellen in a way anger could not protect her from. She saw the boy he once was, baking bread in the dark just to remember the scent of a lost home. The man who had built towers because he had nowhere to belong was now building a place for children, marked by the same kind of loss. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away. The deal closed. Hands were shaken. Papers were signed. Rose Place was safe. Yet as the room cleared, Tessa remained frozen in her chair. Kellen stood by the window with his back to her, waiting. Once they were alone, Tessa walked to him without the anger that used to protect her. She stood close and admitted she had not expected this from him. Kellen kept his hands in his pockets, his gaze unreadable as he murmured, I know, when she asked what he wanted from her. His answer was devastatingly simple. Nothing. He began straightening his papers, hands seeking order in the wreckage between them. The restaurant is yours, he said quietly. Call it a better plan. Tessa offered a small, broken smile and realized he was giving her freedom in the only way he knew how. By removing himself from the bargain, her voice trembled as she said goodbye. His name no longer tasted like desire. It tasted like loss. Leaving the building, the warm sun gave her no comfort. She had won the fight for her mother's legacy, yet her heart ached with a hollow grief she could not name. When the diner reopened, there were no grand speeches, only the familiar chime of the doorbell. Slowly the neighborhood came back to life. Regulars returned. Fresh coffee filled the air. Her father, Ben, rested one hand on the wooden counter he had built years ago and said it felt like breathing again. Tessa told him the truth that night. Not every painful detail, but enough. Ben listened in silence, then surprised her by asking only one question. Did he save this place because he owned you, or because he finally understood what home means? 2 weeks of painful silence passed. No black sedan at the curb. No cold invitations. No piercing green eyes stealing her breath. She had asked for space. But the quiet felt less like freedom and more like punishment. Tessa polished the counter obsessively until Ben gently took the rag from her hand. Later, Milo and Greta walked in, bringing a rush of warmth. Milo carried a small wooden box and said Kellen had rejected his cooking again, which drew a rare, Genuine laugh from Tessa before he hurried off to a date. Inside the box was a loaf of bread, still warm, and a brass plaque for the new foster center. Ben read the name aloud softly. Rose House. Tessa's throat closed. Greta studied Rose's photograph and admitted Kellen had been right to protect this place. She had watched him grow from a damaged, angry young man who never trusted the ground beneath his feet. Ben looked at Tessa and said her mother would have loved that children with nowhere to go would carry her name into a new home. Tessa whispered that Kellen controlled everything because loss was the only teacher he ever had. Greta smiled sadly and said Tessa had made him love something he could not possess. Then Ben took his daughter's hand. Your mother built Rose Place so people could come in from the cold, he said. Do not turn it into a place you use to keep yourself lonely. Greta added quietly that the estate doors would not be locked tonight. Greta's parting words echoed in the quiet diner, but it was her father's blessing that finally settled in Tessa's chest. Good daughters are allowed to want lives of their own, left alone. Tessa realized that honoring her mother did not mean guarding a grave made of memories. Her mother had built Rose's Place to feed the living, not to trap her daughter beside a counter forever. At 1 a.m, Tessa drove through the iron gates of the Franco estate, her heart raw but steady. The first time she came here, she had been cornered by fear. Tonight she chose the road herself. Bobby greeted her with a respectful nod and opened the door to the dim waiting house. She stepped inside, followed the amber light, and walked down toward the basement. Her bare feet found the cool stone stairs, descending into warmth that grew with every step. She smelled it before she saw it. Yeast, wood smoke, and hot flour. The ache in her chest eased as she let go of the exhausting lie that she did not care. Pushing open the heavy iron door, she stepped into the amber glow of the fire. Kellen stood there, shirtless and barefoot, working dough on the old wooden table. Firelight flickered across his broad shoulders and the scars on his back. Beside the oven sat a second small brass plaque, unfinished, with one word engraved at the top, home. When he looked up, his face showed raw disbelief and hidden pain. Tessa did not speak. She only walked in and closed the door behind her, every movement deliberate under his silent, intense gaze. The air between them felt like dry timber waiting for a spark. Tessa stepped to the table, her shoulder lightly brushing his. She poured out flour, added water, and began to work with trembling hands. He watched her fingers with a gaze so hot it felt physical. Is this how you do it? She whispered. Not yet, Kellen answered, his voice rough with restraint. He stepped close behind her, wrapping her in warmth without trapping her, still giving her a chance to pull away. She stayed. Then his hands covered hers, guiding her fingers into the dough with slow, firm pressure. Like this, he whispered against her ear. The heat of the stone oven was nothing beside the warmth of his chest at her back. As Kellen moved closer, his thumb brushed the back of her hand, and the room seemed to narrow around them. He kissed her neck, right where her pulse beat wildly, and a soft sigh slipped from her lips. When she looked up, she saw them reflected in the dusty mirror on the wall. His bare chest behind her, his arms around her, his hands guiding hers. This time she did not panic at the sight. She saw two people who had stopped pretending they were untouched by each other. Tessa turned in his arms, placed her flour-dusted hands against his chest, and met his mouth with a choice clear enough to steady them both. Kellen lifted her onto the flour-dusted table in one smooth motion, and she drew him closer, no longer hiding from what she wanted. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, slow and reverent, as if he still feared she might vanish. The sound of her breath against the stone walls deepened the silence between them. Kellen rested his forehead against hers, his hands trembling at her waist. I need you. Tessa, he whispered, the words rough and unprotected. She locked her fingers in his hair and told him to stop holding back from his own life. The fire burned behind them, But the real heat came from being seen without armor. For once, neither of them reached for control. His lips brushed the soft skin beneath her ear, and her fingers traced the old scars on his back with care instead of pity. The past did not disappear, but it loosened its grip. Together in the glow of warm firelight, they let silence do what words could not. When they finally whispered their love, it sounded less like a confession than a homecoming. As the fire burned low, the scent of rising bread filled the room. By morning, one loaf would go to Rose Place, and another would be served at Rose House, to children learning that home could still be built from broken things. Thank you for listening to Tessa and Kellen's story until the final word. Tell me where you are listening from, and share which moment touched your heart most.